Mid-morning, in the southern stretch of the reserve, the sun had already stripped the land of its early coolness, burning away the thin veil of shade that dawn had left behind and replacing it with a pale, hard light that settled heavily over the plains. The dirt track stretched ahead in a straight, unbroken line, its compacted surface flanked on both sides by brittle grass that had been flattened and frayed by the steady passage of migrating herds. It was a landscape where movement was often subtle, where the life of the bush blended so well with the earth and sky that only trained eyes could catch the flicker of difference. This morning, however, that difference was stark. Just ahead, breaking the uniform pattern of road and grass, lay a small, still shape, its outline softened by a thin veil of dust clinging to its fur. The tawny form was no bigger than a house cat, yet its presence on the open track sent a prickle of unease through Ranger Lindu's instincts. It was a lion cub, lying on its side with its body slack, limbs angled in the careless sprawl of something too tired to resist the ground beneath it. The faint shift of its ribs with each shallow breath confirmed that it was alive, though the movement was irregular and weak, a fragile rhythm that looked as though it could falter without warning. The fur along its flank was dulled and gritty, stripped of the sheen healthy cubs carry, while the faint rosette spots that marked its youth still clung to the fading gold of its coat. Its head rested awkwardly against the hard-packed soil, eyes closed, one ear twitching once before stilling again. Even the insects seemed hesitant, drifting past without landing, as though the cub's stillness offered nothing of interest. Around it, the air shimmered faintly under the sun's weight, making the horizon quiver and the edges of the world blur. Lindu eased the patrol vehicle to a crawl and stopped several meters short, years of field experience telling her that not every silent, unmoving form could be approached without care. Some animals were beyond help, others were resting in ways that were deceptive. Still others had been left deliberately by their mothers, the reasons hidden in the logic of survival that only the wild understood. She stepped down quietly, her boots pressing into the dry grass with a sound like thin paper crumpling, the small noises swallowed quickly by the open air. Her gaze stayed on the cub, reading the small signs that spoke more clearly than any sound, the too long pauses between breaths, the faint tremor in a hind leg, and the way the body lay too heavily against the earth for an animal of its age. Cubs this young should twitch with unspent energy, startle at the smallest shift in the air, or shift their paws restlessly even in rest. But this one seemed anchored in exhaustion. Lindui's eyes swept the bush to either side of the track, searching for the movement of grass stems brushed by a passing flank, the flick of a tail through shadow, or the steady rise of a lioness's back above the grass line. Nothing moved. The silence was thin, layered only with the faint hiss of cicadas and the occasional dry tick of seed pods contracting in the heat. She returned her attention to the cub, which stirred faintly, a hind leg shifting as though in a reflexive dream, before settling once again into stillness. From the dry, cracked leather of its nose to the small mats of fur at the nape of its neck, every detail pointed toward the toll of heat and dehydration. Its breathing was uneven, each inhale shallow, each exhale a brief collapse of the chest. The dust ring around its nostrils and the faint line of dried saliva at the corner of its mouth spoke of strain. Its lips were dry, and the skin around its eyes seemed tight. There were no obvious injuries. No blood, no gaping wounds, no swarm of flies gathering at a vulnerable site, but its weakness was no less dangerous. A cub in this state, under this sun, without the protection and nourishment of its mother, had only hours at best before the heat finished what the night had begun. Lindu knew that in the open, even the shadow of the pride could offer safety only so long as the cub could keep up. Once left behind, its survival window was narrow and unforgiving. She straightened slowly, letting her eyes travel again to the horizon. If the pride had moved on with the first light, they could be several kilometers away by now beyond the range of her hearing, their tracks already softened by the wind. Searching for them would take time she did not know the cub could afford. Moving it, however, carried its own risks. The scent of human contact might cause the mother to reject it, or the separation from its location could make reunion impossible. This was the balance every ranger dreaded. Act too quickly and risk severing a natural bond. Act too slowly and lose the life altogether. The sun had climbed higher still, flattening the light until every color was muted into gold and brown, the shadow of the cub barely visible beneath it. Lindiwe took a step forward. Slow and measured, pausing with each shift to gauge the animal's response. The cub's ears flicked once, the barest acknowledgement of movement, and a faint, breathy sound escaped it. Not the sharp cry of distress nor the playful squeak of a healthy cub, but something caught between a mew and a rasp, as if even making the sound cost effort. She lowered herself to a crouch, her weight balanced to avoid sudden movement, and let her voice carry just enough to bridge the space. "It's okay, little one," she said, the words not meant to soothe in the human sense but to mark her presence in a way that was steady and unthreatening. The cub's eyes opened briefly, a sliver of dull amber beneath heavy lids before sliding closed again. A small puff of dust rose with its next exhale, drifting across its whiskers before settling in the fine fur of its muzzle. Somewhere far off, beyond the wavering heat haze, the grass shifted in a faint passing breeze, but no form moved toward them. The absence pressed in as much as the heat. Lindiwe stayed crouched, watching the fragile rise and fall of the cub's chest, the tremor that rippled through its side after each breath. Every moment she weighed her options. The risks shifted, but never disappeared. If she turned away to track the pride, the cub might succumb to the heat before she returned. If she stayed, she would need to decide soon how far to intervene, knowing that any action might alter the cub's chances of rejoining its mother. Here, under the open sky, there was no middle ground. The stakes were plain, stark in their simplicity. If it remained here much longer, its strength would slip beyond recovery, and no reunion, no care, no late decision could pull it back. Lindiwe stayed low beside the cub, letting the silence of the late morning settle around them while her eyes combed the land for any sign of movement that might betray the pride's location. The air was still except for the dry hum of cicadas, carrying no scent or sound of lions, only the faint rustle of grass swaying in the heat. She rose slowly, careful not to disturb the small body lying in the dust, and stepped into the brittle yellow fringe of grass bordering the dirt track. Years of tracking had trained her to look first for the bold and then for the subtle, and here both spoke. Just beyond the road, half hidden under scattered stalks, she found the first sign, the broad, rounded depression of an adult lioness's paw, its edges already softening under a light wind. A smaller print lay near it, the size and shape matching a young cub, angled in the same direction. She moved forward, noting the way the ground bore faint marks of multiple animals traveling together. Some impressions deep where the weight had pressed into softer soil, others light, skimming over firmer patches. The line of prints ran northeast, threading through tufts of dry grass and over small rises in the land. Kneeling beside one of the clearer tracks, she pressed her palm against it. The soil within was still warm but not hot, meaning the mark had been made hours earlier. That knowledge tightened the quiet weight in her chest. The pride had left well before the sun reached its height, putting them several kilometers ahead by now. Distance in this terrain meant risk, and risk for a cub left alone was uncompromising. Without the protection of the group, it was exposed to the heat, to thirst, and to any predator scanning for weakness. She followed the trail further, each step confirming the pride's steady pace, no scattered paw marks, no broken pattern to suggest panic or a chase. This had been a deliberate departure, the kind that happened when a cub fell behind or was too weak to continue. In the unspoken calculations of the wild, mothers sometimes left their young to rest, trusting that strength would return enough for the cub to follow later. But here, under this rising sun, the small body on the track showed no such recovery. Turning back, she saw it from a distance again, just a pale, still shape against the earth. As she closed the gap, the cub lifted its head briefly, a sluggish, uncoordinated motion, then let it fall again, the side of its face sinking into the dust with a muted thud. The movement was slow, almost reluctant, as though the effort itself had been weighed and found nearly impossible. Lindewy crouched beside it once more, the heat radiating from the ground in waves that shimmered faintly above the cub's fur. Her eyes swept over its frame, the visible slack in its muscles, the shallow breathing, the slight tremor along its flank. The story the signs told was simple and unkind. The pride was gone, likely too far to reach before the day grew harsher, and the cub's survival window was narrowing with every minute it remained here. Young lions, especially those not yet weaned, could not regulate their body temperature as effectively as adults. Under this heat, without shade or water, the balance between life and collapse could tip in less than an hour. Dehydration would strip the body of strength first, then slow the mind, and eventually leave the cub unable to rise at all. She glanced once more toward the northeast, judging the lay of the land. It would take her at least an hour, maybe two, to catch even the faintest trace of the pride, and every moment away from the cub increased the chance that she would return to find only stillness where it lay now. But remaining here meant a different risk. Intervention could save it. But human scent or displacement might cause the mother to reject it, closing the door to a natural reunion entirely. This was the razor edge of fieldwork, the line where instinct, experience, and the realities of nature collided. The wind shifted gently, stirring the dry seed heads in the grass, their faint rattle the only sound to break the heat's hold. No answering call came from the distance, no low roar or chuff to mark a mother's search. Lindewy stepped closer, lowering herself until her face was level with the cub's flank, watching the way its ribs expanded in shallow, irregular motions. The pattern was slower now, each breath short, as if the body was conserving the last fragments of energy it had left. She extended her hand to hover just above its fur, feeling the faint warmth rising from its side without yet making contact, measuring the fragility of the life beneath it. There was no space for delay. The plain truth was that without action, and soon the cub would not survive to see the shadow of the next acacia tree. The heat of the late morning pressed down with a weight that seemed to slow even the smallest movements, and Lindewy knew that every second counted. She knelt beside the cub once more, letting her eyes sweep over the fragile body with careful attention, cataloging the rise and fall of its shallow, uneven breaths, the faint tremor that ran through its spine, and the way its small paws flexed weakly in the dust as if testing whether the strength still lingered inside them. The skin over its ribs was thin, the outline of each bone visible beneath the soft, tawny fur, mottled with the faint streaks of dirt and dried moisture that marked hours of exposure to the open plain. The cub's head lolled slightly to one side, its neck bending under its own weight, while its ears twitched at the lightest hint of movement in the surrounding grass. Lindewy extended her hands slowly, palms open and steady, giving the small lion every chance to register her presence without panic, her own body moving with the deliberate calm of someone who knew that a sudden motion could trigger fear or further exhaustion. As her fingers brushed lightly against the cub's flanks, it emitted a faint rasping sound, a shallow exhalation that was neither a cry nor a protest, merely a fragile acknowledgement of life. She allowed herself a moment to measure its weight, the limpness that suggested profound fatigue, but also a remaining spark of vitality. Then, with a careful inhale, she eased the cub into her arms, cradling it close to her chest, its tiny body folded against her, its head resting against her forearm, paws draping limply over her wrist. Every movement was measured, deliberate, and designed to avoid jolting the fragile spine or overstressing the weak muscles. The cub's breathing remained shallow, each exhale a whisper against the hot, dry air, while small tremors ran through its shoulders and along its tail. Lindewy's senses stretched outward as well, noting the stillness of the bush around them. The faint shadow of a breeze rustling through scattered acacia leaves and the distant hum of insects that suggested the normal rhythm of the savanna persisted, even as a single life teetered on the edge of survival. She rose slowly, shifting her stance so that the cub was supported evenly, adjusting her hold so that the head was slightly elevated, giving the airway the clearest path possible. The limbs sagged under their own weight, but she felt subtle flexes beneath her fingers, a reminder that the cub's body had not yet surrendered entirely. The earth beneath her boots was hard and hot, the coarse texture of the dirt pressing against her soles with each careful step. She kept her eyes ahead, scanning for the nearest patch of shade, the small cluster of trees that might offer relief from the relentless sun, and the faintest trickle of moisture that could provide the first immediate sip of hydration once the cub was settled. With each step, the weight of the small lion pressed against her chest, a living measure of vulnerability, and she adjusted, shifted, and readjusted, ensuring that no sudden movement would exacerbate the shallow rasping that punctuated the silence. The cub's fur, while soft, carried a fine grit of dust from the track where it had lain, and she made a mental note to gently clear the worst once it was in safety, knowing that every irritant could exacerbate discomfort or stress. The tail hung limply, occasionally twitching in response to subtle shifts in her hold, while the ears flicked at every small sound, a delicate awareness that even in near helplessness, instinct persisted. The cub's eyes were half closed, lid edges flicking at the slanting sun, and though there was no sign of distress in the usual sense, the subtle tension in its small limbs and the shallow, uneven breaths made clear that the animal's endurance was already stretched to its limit. Lindiwee's own pace slowed further, measured in the tiniest increments, stepping over uneven ground with a careful survey of every pebble, clump of grass, and rise in the terrain that could shift the cub's fragile balance. The space between the dirt track and the small grove she had targeted for shade was brief in distance but immense in significance. Each second carried the weight of survival, and she moved with the acute awareness that a stumble, a slip, or even a misjudged placement could tip the delicate scale. When she reached the chosen spot, she lowered herself to one knee first, then gently laid the cub down on a soft bed of grass, arranging it so that its back was supported, head slightly elevated, paws lightly tucked in, and tail stretching without strain. The cub exhaled a faint, shallow rasp as if acknowledging the slight change in position, a subtle shift that reminded her that life persisted, fragile but present. She stayed beside it, hand resting lightly along the small flank, feeling the faint pulse beneath the skin, the soft tremors that indicated muscular response, and the irregular rise and fall of the rib cage. The shade filtered through the sparse leaves, casting gentle patterns over the cub's tawny coat, and the slight wind carried away the hottest edge of the morning, softening the air around them. Lindiwee's attention remained entirely on the cub, noting the tiniest flick of its ears, the subtle twitch of whiskers, and the occasional parting of lips in a breath, all measures of survival she could act upon. She allowed herself a quiet moment to observe the overall state. The limpness, the slow recovery of small movements as it settled into the softer ground, the faint rasping that continued steadily rather than fading entirely, and the delicate balance that remained between weakness and the instinct to fight for life. Every observation informed her next action, whether that was adjusting its positioning, monitoring the breathing, or simply staying still, a presence of calm that would allow the cub to conserve its energy while still remaining under careful watch. The landscape stretched around them, indifferent to the fragility at its heart, and yet within this small patch of shadow, with careful hands and measured movements, a life had been shifted from peril to a tenuous hope. "You're almost there," she murmured softly, voice low enough to soothe without startling, a gentle acknowledgement of the cub's struggle and of the delicate trust now shared. As she stayed beside it, the heat softened slightly with the movement of the sun, the small rustle of leaves providing the only reminder of the larger world beyond, and the faint, steady rasp of breaths signaled the persistence of life, delicate, tenuous, and carefully preserved. The cub rested against the soft, uneven grass beneath the sparse canopy of an acacia tree, its tiny body curled into a loose ball, head tucked slightly as though instinctively seeking warmth and protection. Lindiwe adjusted the blanket of dust and dried leaves beneath it, smoothing a patch to offer the slightest relief from the hard earth while keeping her hands light, never imposing, simply guiding and supporting the fragile animal with deliberate care. Each breath it drew was faint and uneven, a small rasp that rose and fell with the irregular rhythm of exhaustion, and she counted them silently, marking the persistence of life that still clung to the tiny frame. Her eyes remained alert, sweeping the horizon, the distant silhouettes of the savannah moving under the mid-morning sun, scanning for any sign of the pride, any shadow or flicker of movement that might indicate the mother was near. The landscape stretched endlessly, golden grasses whispering against one another, the heat rising in waves from the dusty earth, and yet within the protective shadow of the tree a small bubble of temporary safety had been created, fragile but necessary. Lindiwe shifted her weight, kneeling beside the cub, one hand lightly resting against its back, feeling the faint tremors that ran through its small muscles, the subtle adjustments it made as it sought even the smallest comfort, every motion a testament to instinct that remained even in weakness. She spoke softly once, low and measured, "It's okay, girl." A brief reassurance carried more for the rhythm of her own movements than for any understanding, a gentle punctuation in the quiet. The cub twitched slightly at the sound, ears flicking, eyelids fluttering, yet it remained mostly still, conserving energy, the tiny chest rising and falling slowly, the limbs sagging with the weight of hours spent without nourishment or care. Lindiwe's gaze returned to the horizon, tracing the undulating lines of the grass, the occasional dark tuft of a termite mound, and the flicker of distant antelope or warthog moving through the brush. But there was no sign of the lioness, no movement that might signal a return to the cub. Minutes extended into a small eternity, each second punctuated by the soft rasp of breaths and the quiet rustle of leaves overhead, a constant reminder of the precariousness of the situation. Every so often the cub shifted minutely, stretching a paw or rolling slightly, the soft flexing of muscles that had barely enough strength to respond to instinct, and Lindiwe's hands followed these motions gently, ensuring that each movement did not strain the small body. She took a small sip of water, careful not to draw attention to herself with sudden sounds or movements, knowing that the cub's survival depended on the preservation of calm, that any abrupt action could provoke stress or trigger panic. The shade of the acacia offered the gentlest relief from the blazing sun, a cool patch of scattered shadows moving with the slight wind, the branches swaying lightly, and she noted how the cub's fur absorbed the filtered light, the tiny golden hairs catching patches of warmth and shadow. A subtle interplay that seemed to cradle it in the natural rhythm of the day. Lindiwe's mind remained occupied with observation, the state of the cub, the surrounding terrain, potential threats, and the dwindling window in which the mother might return. She adjusted the position of the cub again, a slight lift here, a gentle nudge there, maintaining the delicate balance between intervention and preservation of instinctual behaviors. Each twitch of the ears, flick of the tail, and soft sigh was catalogued carefully, a silent communication of what the body still could manage and what needed protection. Time pressed on slowly, an hour creeping past with the horizon unchanged, and the absence of the mother became an increasing concern, the risk intensifying with each quiet moment. Lindiwe remained unmoving beside the cub, the smallest rustle of clothing or cautious shift of her knees the only sign of her presence, an unspoken vigil that matched the quiet rhythm of the savannah, attuned to the subtleties of life and absence around her. The cub's eyes, half-lidded, occasionally twitched open, following a distant sound, the faint whisper of the wind, or the subtle movement of a bird taking flight. each signal processed with the lingering energy it could muster, a delicate awareness that spoke more of survival than comprehension. Lindiwee's heartbeat was steady, her breath slow and controlled, matching the careful, precise manner in which she had approached the rescue, a physical and mental discipline that allowed her to remain present, to absorb the gravity of vulnerability in the smallest form before her. The sun continued its steady climb, light shifting in faint patches through the acacia's branches, highlighting the delicate curves of the cub's tiny frame, the fine details of fur and whisker, and the subtle rise and fall of each shallow breath. Shadows lengthened and shortened in a soft, cyclical dance across the ground, moving over the small form, a gentle rhythm that marked the passage of time and underscored the urgency of each remaining moment. Lindiwee's eyes never left the surrounding bush, scanning for any familiar patterns, any sign that the mother's return might be imminent. The tension of waiting was carried in quiet observation rather than motion, each second a deliberate measure of potential survival. She allowed herself small, controlled adjustments, a slight repositioning of the cub, and a gentle brush of dust from its fur, always maintaining an awareness of the stress that even the smallest interference might cause and the understanding that in these hours, patience and restraint were as critical as decisive action. The cub's small limbs stretched once, twice, a subtle shiver coursing through the body, a reminder that while it rested in the shadow, life persisted, fragile but resilient. And Lindiwee's presence provided a buffer, a measured space in which that life could hold. She remained there, vigilant and calm, every muscle tuned to the balance of stillness and readiness, the quiet monitoring of breath, the occasional soft rasp of exhale, the gentle shift of paws and the faint flick of tail, all delicate indicators of endurance and survival. The minutes became hours, each one unrolling slowly, marked only by the soft whisper of wind and the intermittent sound of distant creatures, the savanna moving indifferent to the singular drama unfolding beneath the acacia. Every passing moment without the mother's return heightened the fragility of the cub's existence, each second reinforcing the critical need for steady presence and attentive care. Lindiwee remained kneeling, hands lightly resting along the tiny frame, watching, waiting, ensuring the cub remained supported, protected, and monitored, the weight of responsibility pressing gently but unrelentingly upon her. The small patch of shade offered temporary relief from the relentless sun, and she adjusted the cub so that the soft grass supported its back and the slight elevation of the head encouraged easier breathing. Each movement of the cub was followed with attentive hands, every soft sound, twitch and flex noted, and a continuous vigil sustained in silence and stillness. The sun began to dip slightly toward the horizon, shifting the angles of light, casting longer shadows through the sparse leaves above, the air cooling subtly, the rustle of grass and leaves whispering softly in accompaniment to the faint rasp of the cub's breath, and still the mother did not appear. Lindiwee's eyes remained fixed outward, scanning, alert, measuring the distance, the light, and the shapes moving gently across the grass, hoping for any sign that would ease the tension that had grown with the passing hour. The cub stirred minutely, a soft shift, a tiny paw pressing against the grass, the subtle quiver of its tail, and the faint rise and fall of its chest, all indicators that life persisted, delicate and unyielding even under extreme stress. Lindiwee's hand moved once more, brushing lightly along its back, fingers tracing gentle lines that offered a sense of contact, warmth, and protection without intrusion. A calm presence reinforcing the fragile resilience of the body beneath her touch. Every moment was a careful calculation. The balance between intervention and preservation was maintained with patient precision. The urgency was present but restrained, and the focus was entirely on sustaining life while awaiting a possible reunion. The wind shifted slightly, rustling leaves overhead and moving the tall grasses around the base of the acacia, carrying with it the subtle sense of the savanna, dry earth, dust, and distant vegetation, a reminder of the larger world continuing around them while the cub remained isolated, small, and vulnerable. Lindywee's eyes continued to sweep the horizon, scanning for movement, searching for any trace of familiarity, any signal that the mother might be near, yet the hours stretched without change, the cub's fragile breaths the only steady rhythm in a landscape otherwise alive with gentle motion. In the shade of the acacia, the cub remained curled and still, its tiny body rising and falling slowly, softly, delicately, each motion a testament to the tenuous grip on life it maintained. Lindywee's vigil persisted, unbroken, each movement, each observation measured, each breath a quiet accompaniment to the soft rasp that signaled survival. The sun, now angled more sharply across the grass, cast a gentle golden hue, and in the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft warmth against the cub, there was a quiet persistence, a fragile hope in the waiting, and a delicate pause in the vast, indifferent savanna, where life hung in balance and care remained the only intervention possible. The faint rustle of grass carried through the air, mingling with the soft sigh of the wind, and then it came, a deep, resonant roar, low and vibrating, rolling across the plains with a presence that demanded attention. Lindywee's body stiffened, eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon, immediately tracing the source of the sound. A lioness emerged slowly from the tall, waving grasses, her movements deliberate, every step measured, muscles rippling beneath tawny fur that caught the golden light of the late afternoon. Her ears were pricked, eyes sharp and wide, nostrils flaring to catch the faint scents lingering in the air, her gaze sweeping the surroundings with careful precision. The cub stirred slightly beneath the acacia, sensing the tremor of authority in the distant roar, its small body tense and still, limbs tucked in close, conserving what energy it had left. Lindywee shifted her weight slightly, hands hovering protectively over the tiny frame, aware that any abrupt movement could provoke hesitation or panic in either the cub or the approaching adult. The lioness advanced cautiously, her steps soft but deliberate, each paw pressing into the dry earth without a sound, tail flicking with subtle adjustments that mirrored the careful evaluation of risk and threat that filled the air. Lindywee's eyes followed every motion, noting how the head was held low but alert, shoulders tense yet controlled, and the gaze flicking repeatedly between the acacia and the open plains, weighing the possibilities, gauging danger and opportunity. The cub let out a faint, barely audible whimper, a tiny sound that rose and fell quickly, instinctively signaling need, and Lindywee's hand moved slightly, brushing along its back to provide a measure of reassurance without breaking the fragile calm she had maintained for hours. The distance between the two closed incrementally, each moment stretching with intensity, the stakes growing visibly as the lioness moved closer, the body taut with the need to assess, to react, to reclaim what had been temporarily lost. Lindywee remained low, still and quiet, mindful of the delicate balance between intervention and observation, knowing that her presence had to be as unobtrusive as possible while the cub remained at risk. The lioness paused, nose twitching, eyes narrowing as the scent of the cub reached her more distinctly, the low rumble of the throat vibrating faintly, a sound both commanding and uncertain, a natural test of proximity and intention. Lindywee's gaze never left the approaching figure. Each subtle flex of muscle, each flick of ear, each cautious step was recorded silently, the unspoken communication of predator and offspring playing out in real time. The cub shifted slightly, small paws brushing the grass, soft exhalations marking fragile attempts to adjust to the presence of its mother, and a tentative movement toward recognition without any comprehension of the surrounding danger. Lindywee spoke softly, a quiet cadence carrying over the faint breeze. "You're almost there. The words meant only to maintain the rhythm of calm and attention, a human thread woven into the delicate dance of instinct and survival. The lioness's head lowered, the eyes scanning, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling to detect even the faintest sounds. All senses active, each movement calculated to avoid startling the cub while asserting the authority of the mother. With each cautious advance, the tension mounted, the landscape itself seeming to hold its breath. Grasses standing still in the faint wind, the distant horizon stretching endlessly, indifferent yet witness to the fragile balance between life and risk unfolding beneath the acacia. The cub's body quivered slightly with each approach, small limbs flexing against the soft ground, ears flicking, eyes widening in reflexive caution, yet the measured presence of Lindui kept panic at bay, maintaining a protective buffer as the mother closed the distance. The lioness came to a halt just beyond the patch of shade, muscles coiled yet relaxed, gaze fixed intently on the tiny form before her, a silent negotiation of trust, recognition and instinct taking place in the still air. Lindui's hands hovered, ready to intervene if necessary, but the subtle shift of posture, the gentle lowing of the chest, and the controlled exhalation of both human and cub all contributed to a delicate equilibrium that preserved life while the reunion approached. Slowly, ever so slowly, the mother lowered her head, scenting, listening, evaluating, until finally a single step brought her within reach of the cub. Tiny paws lifted slightly in response, a cautious curiosity mingling with instinctive recognition, the small body testing the boundaries of safety while the larger, confident presence of the mother radiated authority and care. Lindui exhaled softly, maintaining stillness, allowing the natural processes to unfold. The lioness circling gently before settling near the cub, nose brushing lightly against the fur, a subtle affirmation of recognition, of reunion, of the fragile survival preserved through patience and vigilance. The cub pressed against the mother, tentative at first, then with slightly more confidence, trembling softly but drawing warmth and reassurance from the proximity, each movement a silent echo of the life and death stakes that had persisted for hours. The wind stirred gently through the savanna, brushing against the grass, carrying faint sounds of distant birds and rustling creatures, a quiet accompaniment to the reunion, the moment steeped in tension now shifting toward resolution. Lindui allowed herself a measured blink, hands still poised lightly near the cub, the careful balance of presence and restraint maintained until the mother's attention fully encompassed the small body. The cub nestled safely against her side. The roar faded into the distance, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves, the subtle rise and fall of the mother's breathing, the soft, irregular sighs of the cub, and the gentle whisper of wind across the plains, marking the survival that had hung in delicate balance, now affirmed in quiet, steady rhythm. The tension hung in the air like a living thing, thick and palpable as the lioness paused several meters from the acacia, every muscle in her body taut with deliberation. Her gaze locked unwaveringly on the tiny cub cradled in Lindu's steady hands. The plain around them stretched wide and silent, the tall grasses swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze, each movement of the environment a subtle accompaniment to the quiet, high-stakes encounter unfolding at its center. The cub, limp but alive, emitted faint, raspy breaths, tiny flanks rising and falling under the ranger's careful hold. A fragile pulse of life carried in the warmth of human hands that had cradled it from the moment it had been found. The lioness's tail flicked once, sharply, then remained rigid, a subtle indicator of indecision, the struggle between instinctive urgency and a cautious awareness of the human presence evident in every precise measured motion. Her ears rotated constantly, picking up the softest sounds, while her nostrils flared rhythmically, drawing in scent after scent, parsing the air for reassurance, for threat, for any signal that might inform the next action she would take. Lindui's own movements were slow and deliberate, a careful choreography of calm and restraint, hands positioned to cradle and shield without intimidation, eyes attentive to the smallest cues in the lioness's body language, each flick of an ear or subtle shift of weight a potential signal of escalation or retreat. The cub's tiny limbs twitched slightly. Tentative attempts to adjust or react, and Lindewee's palm brushed softly along its back, a gesture meant to ground, to offer comfort, a stabilizing presence against the vulnerability of its tiny body. The lioness lowered her head, eyes narrowing, nostrils quivering, in a silent assessment that was both urgent and cautious. Every step, every micro-adjustment of posture, reflected a delicate balance between the need to reclaim her offspring and the instinctive caution that humans inspire in wild predators. Lindewee's heartbeat, though steady, mirrored the gravity of the moment, each second stretching long as the plains seemed to collectively hold their breath. The wind carried faint scents of earth and dry grass, stirring the stillness around them, and with each flutter of movement in the grass, the lioness's attention sharpened, ears swiveling toward the sound, muscles coiled as if ready to lunge but restrained by calculation and instinct. The cub's small exhalations punctuated the silence, a rhythm of life that seemed almost fragile against the immense presence of the approaching mother, and Lindewee's soft whisper, "It's okay, girl," barely rose above the whisper of the wind, meant not to command but to steady, to affirm calm in a space where fear and survival were delicately intertwined. The lioness's gaze flicked between the cub and Lindewee's hands, eyes reflecting a cautious intensity, pupils dilated slightly as she weighed distance and threat, the body quivering imperceptibly with the tension of decision-making, every step backward or forward a negotiation of risk and instinct. Lindewee adjusted slightly, tilting her hands just enough to keep the cub close to her chest, a protective posture that minimized movement while maintaining warmth and stability. Her calm demeanor acting as a bridge between the wild instinct of the mother and the vulnerability of the cub. The lioness moved a single step closer, muscles tensing then relaxing, head lowered, scanning the ground and the immediate space around the ranger, each movement deliberate, a measured attempt to assess whether retrieving the cub would provoke aggression or whether patience might yield the reunion. The cub shifted fractionally, ears flicking in response to the low rumble in the lioness's chest, tiny limbs flexing with tentative anticipation, while the ranger's hands remained firm, cradling, ready to act if the delicate balance tipped toward danger. Time stretched taut, seconds drawn into long, almost tangible threads, the plains holding the quiet tension, the golden light of the late afternoon catching the tawny coat of the lioness and glinting softly in her eyes. A mixture of urgency and hesitation evident in the slow, careful flex of her shoulders. Lindewee's gaze did not waver, noting the subtle rise and fall of the mother's breathing, the slow rotation of the ears, and the barely perceptible twitch of whiskers, each a signal of calculation, each a hint of intent that could change the course of what had already been a tense rescue. The cub exhaled again, a soft, wet sound that punctuated the quiet, a reminder of vulnerability and the stakes that rested on every measured move in this fragile encounter. The lioness's head dipped slightly, a slow, deliberate lowering, eyes never leaving the cub, a silent negotiation that carried all the weight of life and instinct, an unspoken communication between species bound by the raw realities of survival and maternal care. Lindewee remained still, a presence of calm and consistency, allowing the natural behaviors to unfold while ensuring the cub remained protected, a human mediator between instinctual urgency and careful restraint. Each subtle shift of the lioness, each soft step closer, carried the potential for escalation, the quiet threat of sudden action tempered by an understanding of the precarious balance. The cub's tiny body pressed slightly into Lindewee's chest, a flicker of recognition and movement alone, and the lioness's ears flicked again, a subtle acknowledgement of presence and proximity. The soft rumble in the mother's throat continued, low and vibrating, a tentative communication that blended with the wind and the faint creak of distant grass, signaling awareness, intent, and the measured approach that only instinct could calibrate. Minutes stretched, yet every heartbeat, every breath was drawn out, heavy with anticipation, and every subtle motion in the lioness's posture was analyzed, gauged, and responded to by the ranger, who understood that patience was as critical as action. Lindywee's hands never faltered, the cub secure, warm, and shielded, the body weight distributed evenly to allow micro-adjustments without sudden movement, preserving calm while the lioness evaluated every aspect of the situation. The distance between mother and cub diminished with the slowness of careful intent, the tawny coat rippling subtly with every deliberate step, the head held low but eyes unblinking, the presence of instinctual authority palpable, and the gravity of reunion and risk interwoven into each breath, each measured shift of weight, and each cautious step forward. The plains, wide and silent, seemed to stretch infinitely around them, holding space for a reunion that balanced on the edge of hesitation and need, while the golden light softened shadows beneath the acacia, framing the delicate scene of predator, offspring, and human mediator. With every measured movement, the air itself felt taut, heavy with life, with urgency, with anticipation, a living testament to patience, courage, and respect for the fragile margins on which survival rested. And then, ever so slowly, the lioness lowered her head further, nostrils flaring as the scent of her cub filled her senses, muscles flexing with the tension of decision, eyes fixed unwaveringly, every instinct screaming both caution and maternal urgency, each step deliberate. The world around them holding its breath as the delicate approach continued, the line between risk and reunion suspended in quiet, watchful balance. The stillness of the plain seemed to thicken with every measured second as the lioness's low chuff rolled softly across the warm air, a gentle vibration that resonated with the urgency and caution of her presence. Her eyes, wide and alert, remained locked on the tiny cub cradled against Lindy's chest, muscles coiled and ready yet restrained. The tension of instinct tempered by hesitation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the great cat inched forward, each step deliberate, paws pressing lightly into the dry earth, claws retracting just enough to avoid startling the cub, ears swiveling to catch the slightest noise from the ranger, and body shifting in subtle signals of calm assertion. Lindywee's hands mirrored the precision of the approach, adjusting her grip to maintain warmth and protection, while ensuring there was no sudden motion that might provoke fear or a defensive reaction, the weight of responsibility pressing quietly, persistently, in every careful gesture. The cub's tiny head moved slightly, whiskers twitching, ears flicking toward the low chuff, its small limbs curling reflexively against the soft support of human hands, a tentative acknowledgement of safety mediated through warmth and stillness. Around them, the grasses whispered in the wind, bending under the afternoon breeze, the distant silhouettes of acacias framing a tableau in which patience, calculation, and instinct interwove, each element supporting the precarious balance of life and reunion. The lioness lowered her head further, soft rumbling resonating in her throat, eyes tracking every micro-movement of Lindywee's hands, reading intention without need for sound or sudden motion. Her tail flicked once, then stilled, a subtle rhythm of thought and readiness, signaling cautious negotiation rather than confrontation. Her body language conveying both authority and restraint in a rare, wordless exchange. Lindywee's palms shifted gently beneath the cub, tilting the small body forward just enough to create a space of accessibility, allowing instinct and trust to bridge the fragile gap between predator and human mediator, each micro-adjustment deliberate and precise. The lioness's whiskers brushed the air as she exhaled softly, ears rotating backward then forward, a fluid calibration of awareness, patience, and controlled urgency, every movement holding the potential to tip the balance toward life or loss. The cub, sensing proximity without threat, pressed a small damp nose against Lindy's chest before lifting slightly, a subtle gesture of readiness, a silent cooperation born of instinct and conditioned trust, the minute adjustments of its tiny body harmonizing with the deliberate posture of the approaching mother. Lindy bent slightly, chest forward, shoulders steady, lowering the cub with measured control toward the tawny paws resting lightly on the earth, ensuring the descent was slow, secure, and non-threatening, each millimeter of motion deliberate in maintaining calm. The lioness's low chuff echoed again, vibrating in the air between them, soft and insistent, a steady signal of acceptance. Patience and maternal intent, eyes unwavering, body taut, yet relaxed in disciplined anticipation. As the cub's small weight met the ground, its legs folding beneath it, tiny claws brushing the soft dirt, the lioness shifted slightly forward, head lowering to nuzzle the tiny form with careful, controlled pressure, a soft exhalation accompanying each touch, a silent acknowledgement that the fragile connection had been restored without danger or escalation. Lindy's hands lingered briefly, supporting without interfering, ensuring the cub remained upright, safe, and balanced, before slowly withdrawing, maintaining proximity but ceding space, her calm posture a reinforcement of trust that allowed the mother to regain confidence. The cub blinked, ears flicking, body quivering only slightly as the lioness's nose touched its head, chest, and paws in a rhythmic sequence of inspection and reassurance, every subtle motion communicating recognition, care, and the silent restoration of connection. The plains absorbed the quiet intensity of the moment, each gust of wind brushing across dry grass and dust carrying the low chuff and soft exhalations, a soundscape of tentative reunion and instinctual respect, the delicate negotiation of survival and trust rendered in unspoken movements. The lioness's gaze lifted briefly, scanning the space around her, confirming safety, while keeping the cub within reach, muscles relaxing fractionally, tail still. Ears pricked forward in gentle attention, signaling a shift from guarded calculation to cautious acceptance. Lindy exhaled softly, the smallest relief passing through her chest, her eyes following every motion, hands ready to intervene if needed, but allowing nature to reclaim its course in measured increments. The cub nestled at the lioness's paws, shivering faintly yet safe, and the mother adjusted once more, her low head brushing the cub's fur. A soft vibration of satisfaction resonating in the air, neither sudden nor threatening, only precise, controlled, and inherently maternal. Every element of the scene, the breeze, the whispering grasses, the low chuff, the subtle tremble of tiny limbs, the careful step of a predator learning trust, coalesced into a single delicate choreography of life preserved. The tiger's gaze softened slightly, not in anthropomorphized emotion but in the rigid, exact language of instinct recognizing opportunity and safety, the negotiation complete in its silent, deliberate terms. Lindy's shoulders relaxed fractionally, eyes lingering on the interaction, a steady presence supporting the fragile, wordless agreement, maintaining readiness while allowing natural behavior to unfold without interference. In those quiet moments, the plains seemed to breathe with them, the soft rhythm of life threading through every tuft of grass, every flick of tail. And every gentle exhale, a testament to patience, precision, and the extraordinary possibility of trust between species. And as the lioness shifted slightly to settle the cub closer to her chest, the wind rose softly, moving through the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and fur across the plains, and a distant herd of antelope lifted their heads in unison, the low, steady sound of life pressing onwards across the quiet, golden expanse. The lioness moved with a fluid precision that seemed almost sculpted by instinct as she took the cub gently between her jaws, careful to avoid pressure that could harm the fragile body, each step measured and deliberate. The soft grass whispered beneath her weight, bending and folding in her passage, hiding the faint prints of paws that carried her and her cub toward safety. Lindawi held his breath, eyes fixed on the tawny shape, watching every nuanced movement, aware that a single misstep could undo all the careful progress of the past hours. The cub, quiet now, pressed its small head lightly against the lioness's chest, legs tucked in a natural curl, responding to the steady rhythm of her stride rather than any human intervention. There was a tension in the air, a delicate balance between relief and continued risk, as the plains seemed to pause around them, the distant call of birds and the rustle of grasses the only sounds marking the passage of time. The lioness's muscles shifted subtly beneath her coat, shoulder blades sliding over ribs with each step, head slightly lowered, ears rotating, attuned to any hint of danger, yet nothing came to challenge the fragile equilibrium of this reunion. Lindawi exhaled slowly, hands releasing the lingering tension, knowing that though the cub was safe in maternal care, the vigilance could not yet entirely fade. The threat of unseen predators or sudden hazards remained an ever-present undercurrent. The golden afternoon light brushed across the tips of the tall grasses, highlighting the subtle sway as the lioness disappeared, the cub's tiny form shielded, a muted vibration of warmth and life beneath the mother's careful grip. Each step forward was a negotiation with gravity, terrain, and instinct. The lioness adjusted her pace when the ground dipped or rose, head tilting slightly, whiskers brushing blades, eyes scanning the horizon with quiet, deliberate awareness. Even as she moved deeper into the cover, there was no sudden rush, no hasty flight, just the rhythmic, exacting progress of a predator ensuring survival, each measured step carrying both reassurance and urgency for the cub. Lindawi remained frozen, posture taut yet restrained, acknowledging that his role had transitioned from guardian to silent witness. His presence a calm anchor in the background, ensuring no inadvertent interference disrupted the delicate maternal process. The air seemed heavier here, filled with the scent of dry earth and sun-warmed vegetation, a rich tapestry of the grassland that held both refuge and risk, every rustle a subtle reminder of the fragile line between safety and loss. The lioness's tail flicked gently at intervals, a nuanced communication of readiness and reassurance. A silent language that spoke volumes in its simplicity, guiding the cub through the undulating blades toward a place where concealment and protection merged. The cub made no noise, its small body molded to the contours of its mother's chest, muscles relaxed yet poised for sudden movement if necessary, ears twitching, eyes half closed, sensing the safe rhythm of her stride. Around them, the grass swayed and whispered, bending under the weight of each passing paw. The horizon stretched in a muted palette of gold and green, a world vast and indifferent yet momentarily intimate in this exchange of life. Lindawi's gaze followed the tapering figure until the last flick of tail vanished behind the undulating sea of grass, a slow, pulsive motion that drew his attention until the final movement merged with shadow and texture. He exhaled fully, shoulders releasing a tension that had accumulated across hours of careful observation and precise action. A faint hum of quiet relief threading through his chest, the plains around him returning to their ordinary rhythm, yet forever marked by the extraordinary scene he had witnessed. The grasses resumed their gentle sway in the warm afternoon breeze. The distant silhouettes of antelope moved in languid patterns across the plain, and the low, steady hum of life continued uninterrupted, carrying the scent of earth, sun, and tawny fur across the expansive horizon. The lioness was gone from sight, yet the impression of her presence lingered, etched into memory by every careful step, every flick of tail, every measured motion of trust restored, and as the light shifted, softening into a muted amber, the plains seemed to breathe with the quiet pulse of survival, the gentle wind moving through tall grass, carrying the memory of reunion into the wide, endless distance.